us. I think everybody here knows me. Yeah, they do. So Kate Hand is a very, very long-term client of ours. We've known each other for probably pushing 20 years. And in our discussions over the last 12 months or so, Kate has shared this project and this passion that she's been working on, and the coaching that she's been doing. And from those conversations, it just sounded like a lot of what she has to share will be beneficial for all of you guys. So I think that's probably a good segue. I'll give you the floor and let you take over, Kate.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Irene, and thanks, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and we'll get into our session right away. I'll just quickly give you a little bit of my background. Yeah, I think we met in about 1998, Irene. So dating both of us. I mean, we don't look a day over 21, right?
Of course.
So my background is in leadership development and facilitation. And more recently, I started coaching with high performing professionals, overachievers, you might say, which I could relate to. And I also discovered a few years ago a habit approach out of Stanford University. So we were talking about it a little bit at the beginning. BJ Fogg is a behavior scientist who works at Stanford, and he's got over 20 years of research in human behavior and specifically in habit formation. And what I have found is in working with professionals over the years and with myself, we push ourselves so hard and we constantly set that bar higher and higher and higher, and it's exhausting. And when I started learning about the tiny habits approach that BJ Fogg has created and the principles and the theories behind it, a lot of things clicked for me and helped me to realize that, you know what, we can't keep pushing ourselves. And especially over the past year, if we've taken any lessons from the pandemic, it's actually quite dangerous. People burn out, people get sick. It's very hard to keep pushing forward and keep setting that bar to such a high standard. And so I'm on a bit of a mission now where I'm really trying to help my clients go slow and acknowledge the wins and the good things that they're doing each and every day. And that some days it's okay to just say, man, it sucks, right? And the pandemic has got me down. And that's really hard to keep pushing forward. So that's a lot of the individual coaching that I'm doing right now, as well as with groups and doing, resilience workshops. And I think also, learning how tiny habits can help you keep succeeding, keep pushing towards that success in a way that gives yourself permission to acknowledge the small wins. And so actually, I'd like to start with that today before we get into anything. I just want you all to take a minute. You've all taken time out of your busy day. So thank you for that. This is time for yourself, and you've carved that out, which is amazing. So whether you're on camera or not, that's fine. But I just want everyone to take a minute and just bring those shoulders up to your ears and then relax them. And there's a yoga instructor that I follow who says this thing that I love: your elbows are heavy. So feel the weight in your elbows and allow that to pull your shoulders down a bit. If you need to take in a deep breath, do that, and then smile. And we'll get into it. And again, I'd like you to just think about your day so far today. What's one thing that's a win that you can count on today? You've already had one win for sure already. So take a minute, think of one thing that's already gone well today. And I always say, even if it's showing up for this session, if that's your win, then that's fantastic. So pat yourself on the back for your win. If you want to share it in the chat, you can. And we'll use the chat throughout this session. So, I'm not a very formal person, so feel free to interrupt. Irene will tell me if something goes wrong with the technology. As I said, I'll be sharing some slides. We'll be doing some activities. And so Irene, maybe you'll help, or Andy can help monitor the chat once I'm sharing slides. And I'll go through what we're going to spend the next about 40 or so minutes on. We'll have some time time at the end for questions as well. And I'm just seeing the wins come in. So a vaccination is definitely a big win. That's fantastic. As well as getting a dining room table delivered. That's exciting. Or whether you got some exercise in. You know, my win is that I haven't had to go outside yet today. So I've been able to stay inside. I haven't had to walk the dog outside yet. So that's my win, because I really am tired of this terrible weather. All right, let's get started, and I'll go through how we're going to spend our time together today. So I have 3 things that I want to go over today, and to help you really continue to fuel the success that you're already having in a way that will hopefully not lead to burnout. So we'll go through some basics of behavior change. I'll give you kind of a high level overview of how we change our behaviors. Then we'll get into this approach that was developed by the Stanford behavior scientist BJ Fogg called Tiny Habits. I'll tell you what that's all about. And then you're actually going to get a chance to work on it. So I'm going to have you go through and create some habits that you can apply immediately. And I'll share some that I use as well around specific areas of staying organized, staying connected, and staying positive. 3 things that I think are always important, and even more so given the past year we've all had. So diving right into it, and some basics of behavior change. Now, I am not a neuroscientist. I'm not a scientist. I'm a learning and development professional. But I did, study with BJ Fogg and go through his certification process. And I've always been interested in, change, because really learning is change. So I've done a lot of research over the years on how people learn to change. And so I'll share some personal examples and some examples from clients that I've worked with. And we'll start with a few fundamental principles based on the work of BJ Fogg. So the first one is that we change best by feeling good about ourselves, and not by feeling bad. And the easiest way to maybe, I guess, justify or give some evidence for this statement is to think of the opposite. So think of all those times when you've tried something new, or you've put yourself out there and it didn't go so well. You got embarrassed, or somebody criticized you. We probably have some examples from our childhood of maybe a teacher or a parent, or maybe a first boss, or hopefully not recent bosses. But I think we've evolved a little bit in terms of management styles over the years. But if the first time you try something, it doesn't go well, and you somehow feel like you have, your ego has been bruised, that fires up all of those primal reactions in our brain, the fight, flight, or freeze response. It's just nature taking care of itself. We are not likely to put ourselves in that position again, where we might expose ourselves to failure. Right? Because our brain wants to protect us. The amygdala, if you know a little bit about the brain, the amygdala is that part of your brain that triggers the fight, flight, or flee response, or freeze response, sorry. And so that's just nature protecting itself. So if we want to design for success, if we want to fuel our success and continue to be successful, we need to make sure that we are creating routines, behaviors, habits, things that allow us to see that success, to feel good about ourselves, because that's going to be what allows us to keep going, and it builds that momentum. And so we keep pushing ourselves because we're having success. It feels good, right? And so that's really the key principle that we want to keep coming back to when you're looking to design your life and the behaviors, the routines in your life successfully. We want to do it in a way that we always feel good about ourselves. And so that brings us to this behavior model that BJ Fogg created quite a few years ago, that he has researched and run hundreds of experiments, thousands of experiments through in his lab at Stanford. And basically what it started with was the understanding of what is a behavior anyway? In order to do something, a behavior, you need to have the motivation to do it. You, of course, need the ability to do it. And then you need to be prompted in some way to do that behavior. Makes sense. However, there's a relationship between motivation and ability. And so what BJ Fogg found was that when something, ability to do something, your ability, of course, depending on the action or the behavior, something could be hard for you to do, or it could be easy for you to do. And the same goes for motivation, that sometimes we have high motivation to do something and sometimes we have low motivation. And so depending on that relationship, when prompted, we have this action line. And so if I have the right amount of motivation and I have the right amount of ability, when prompted, I'm going to be above the action line. I'm going to do that behavior. And of course, the same thing holds that if I don't have the right amount of motivation, or I'm not able to do that thing, then when prompted, I won't be able to do the behavior. I just won't do it. And again, some examples here. So just by show of hands, and you can use the hand emoticon at the bottom of your screen, or you can just raise your hand if you're on camera. How many of you have ever trained for a marathon or triathlon or some kind of event where you had to train up for something? Show of hands. Okay, a few of you. What about, I'm sure everyone has done this, a big deadline, a launch of something, or of course an open house or a new big client where you had to work really, really hard to meet that deadline, right? Everyone's had that experience, right? Where you push yourself really hard to get to that finish line, right? So we're good at pushing ourselves to do hard things for a short amount of time. But if we have to do that day in, day out, year over year, that's where that burnout comes in. That's where the exhaustion comes in. And, so the classic example right now that everyone always does in, February, or, it's very sort of common these days to do those 30-day challenges, right? No sugar, no alcohol, no carbs, whatever it is, for 30 days. So doing something like that requires high motivation, and it's pretty hard to do. And so when prompted, we probably are pretty good at doing it for a month. And that's actually pretty long. But then what happens on day 32? Maybe you still do it. What about on day 42? Not many people make it past that mark, right? Because it requires high motivation, and to maintain that level of motivation is exhausting. And sooner or later, something is going to happen where you get prompted to do something or not do something, if you're avoiding sugar or something like that, and you're going to fail. You're going to fall below that action line. And then how are you going to feel? You're probably not going to feel great about yourself, right? You're probably going to be like, oh, I didn't do it. And then what happens the next day? You don't do it again.
Don't do it anymore.
Right? And then you feel guilty about not doing it. Oh, I haven't been to the gym in a week. Or I haven't been, I haven't done that thing that I was meant to do for over a week now. And actually what happens is that pushes down our motivation even further. And so then it's even harder when prompted to push back up that motivation to do that hard thing. So what all of this tells us is that actually, to be successful, to design for success, we need to be working in this very far right-hand corner of the graph where it's easy to do, because you'll notice that when it's really easy to do, we don't actually need motivation, or the need for motivation is lower. And so if we can design behaviors that are so easy to do that we don't need the motivation is less important, when prompted, we are more likely to do that behavior than if we require a lot of motivation to do it. And so that's where this idea of tiny habits came from, was this discovery of, oh, actually, if we make it really easy to do, there's a better chance that we'll keep doing that thing. And in fact, what happens is, let's say I want to train for a marathon and I've never run at all. So the very first thing I do is I put on some running shoes and I go around the block. And if it feels okay, and I'm like, huh, nobody like pointed at me and laughed at me, and I didn't trip on my face, I didn't have a heart attack, like I did it, right? I feel pretty good. And maybe that kicks in those endorphins you get from, when you exercise, and that feels pretty good. And I start to think, huh, maybe I can do this thing. And actually, you then end up using motivation. BJ Fogg calls it the motivation wave, where I kind of ride that wave that spurs me on to do it again, because it wasn't scary. My ego wasn't bruised. I felt good about myself afterwards. And so I feel successful. We change best when we feel successful. And so I do it again. And then maybe I do it again. And I maybe make it a little bit harder. I go, maybe I go a couple of kilometers, or I do a 5K run, but I walk part of the time. And gradually I build my way up, but I'm always above this action line because I'm keeping it where it doesn't feel too hard that I have to rely on upping my motivation. And I'm using that wave of motivation to kind of keep me going. So I'll pause in a minute for questions, but I just want to point out one more thing, that you'll notice on this graph that the action line doesn't touch the X and Y axis, right? So it doesn't come right down to meet the easy to do and the high motivation, because even if I have, super high motivation to do something, I would love to be sitting on a beach right now. I mean, get me to, I don't care where, white sand and water, and I'll pay like, a lot of money to do that right now. And yet I'm also very concerned about my safety. And so I don't actually have the ability right now to go and sit on a beach, right? So, or let's say, you wanted someone to participate in something and you set the entry fee so high that even if they were super motivated to join you, they just couldn't afford it, right? They couldn't pay the entry fee. It doesn't matter how motivated I am to do that thing. If I don't have the ability, either financial or physical, or there's some other constraint on my ability, it doesn't matter how many times you prompt me, I wouldn't be able to do that behavior because I just can't. I don't have the ability to do it. And same thing with motivation. Even if you make it so easy for me to do that behavior, if for some reason I disagree in terms of my values, or there's something that I just don't agree, it doesn't matter again how easy you make it or how many times you prompt me, I have absolutely no desire to do that thing, and so I'm not going to do it. Which explains, if you have kids, why no matter how easy you make something and how many times you prompt them to do the behavior, they don't do it. And your prompts end up becoming a nag, right? And they're completely ineffective. So, we do have free will and choice and agency. And so, we can't just force people to do things. So you have to have some degree of ability, and you have to have some degree of motivation to do the thing. But the idea here is that we try to reduce motivation as much as possible, and we try to make those behaviors as easy to do, and that's the way to reduce motivation. Okay, before I go on, questions or comments on this model, you can use the chat, or you can just take yourself off mute and ask a question.
Did I have a question to something you just said at the end? So when you say you're not reducing the motivation, you're reducing the need for motivation.
Yeah, because okay, so the other big, I guess, principle around this is help people to do what they want to do, right? So if like I absolutely do not want to lift weights, right? I just like can't even stomach the idea, then it's useless, giving me little weights and making it super easy for me to lift weights in a day-to-day basis, because I just don't want to do it. Like, my life is not perfect because I know about tiny habits, right? I still have like all kinds of clutter off camera. my curated life that you're seeing right now might look great. So yeah, you have to have some degree of wanting to do something. And so the idea with, as we'll get into, is you start with the habits and the behaviors that you want to develop. And, we may have time to talk about it, but stopping habits, like breaking bad habits, that's harder, right? Because you're actually reverse engineering this whole thing. And so with breaking habits, you try to make it harder to do. And it's a little bit of a different approach, and it is harder because, as we'll come on to, there's a need for that habit. And so you really have to untangle it and figure out what's going on there. So, we want to start with the things that are positive that we want to work on. And this is a way to think about it. This behavior model helps us to design for success. Questions or comments before we go on? Yeah,
just a quick comment. So would you say that since it's easier to build a new habit than it is to break a bad one, building new positive habits would maybe in a way sort of erase the bad habits that you have, or maybe not make you want to go back to them because they become relevant at some point? I'm hoping.
Yeah, that's absolutely one of the techniques, right? And so that's why we often, when I'm working with clients, I've helped over 500 people, I think by now, develop tiny habits. We always start with the good, positive, tiny habits in your life, because it's a muscle, right? It's something that you develop. So learn how to do the approach, see the success that you can have with those positive habits. Okay. Oftentimes they can replace or make it harder to do the bad habit, right? So let's say like you're always on your phone, or, a common one is that people are on their phone and then that makes them not be able to sleep, and their phone's in like next to their bed and all those things. Well, so instead of breaking that habit, we create another habit. Like after I brush my teeth, I'll put my phone on the stairs, or, I'll leave my phone in the bathroom or something like that, so that it's not next to my bed when I go to sleep, so that I'm not tempted to look at it, during the night or as soon as I wake up, or that kind of thing. You kind of replace the bad habit. All right. So let's get into this a little bit then. So here's an opportunity for you to think about, if I could wave a magic wand, you could wave a magic wand right now. I want you to think about what would help you feel more in control, more successful right now in any aspect of your life. Could be professional, could be personal. Here's where I'm going to invite you to annotate the slide. So if you go up to that view menu, you should see annotate, and you can choose text, and you can write on the slide. If that doesn't work, you can also use chat. So your choice, chat or annotate. What would help you right now? If I could wave a magic wand, anything could happen. What would help make things better for you right now?
Rita says, stay healthy. More sleep.
Yeah, travel for sure.
Yeah, that would be me. Lots of people need more sleep.
Nice, staying out of judgment when making calls. That's a great one.
It's great. Yeah, lots of stuff with health, eh, Kate? Sleep, eating. Somebody else is about to write. This is cool. My annotate doesn't work.
Oh, okay. Is that true for everyone? Oh, there we go.
Oh.
Stricter on lead generation time slot. Okay. All right, I'd
be interested in the better manage my time.
Yep. I'm gonna give you 30 seconds more. All right, I'm going to clear the drawings. I've captured them. So we've got lots around sleep, time management, stricter on lead generation time slot. Can you tell me more about that one? Either in the chat or take yourself off mute if that was, if you feel comfortable sharing on what that one means. Is it about time management?
Sorry, I was trying to get unmuted.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just honor, like I've set time aside for lead gen and then something always happens. So just really honoring that time and treating it like it's vitally important.
Okay, yeah. So again, around that urgent, important, how we manage our day in terms of prioritizing and scheduling our time. Okay, so it seems like there is a mix here of the sort of personal health related habits and the time management, prioritization, work habits, which is very common. So when I work with groups, and I do this type of workshop a lot in different settings, either with teams or with organizations or just, general public, and I get a mix of people coming, these are the big areas that I see. And, often we do start, a good place to start to see how Tiny Habits works is in your personal life. Because I find it's kind of, there's lots of great habits around eating or sleeping or exercise, and tiny ways that you can really make a big difference quickly. And the other big area is around time management. So we'll get into that, and hopefully I'll give you some ideas, and then at the end you'll have a chance to create some habits for yourself. So let me start by explaining what is a tiny habit, and we'll just go through this. So there's 3 parts to a tiny habit. I'll explain each of them and we'll go into detail for each of them as well. The first part, it's a bit of a specific word. We call it an anchor moment, but the idea is that if you are trying to build a new habit, the easiest way to do it is to attach it to something you already do automatically. And so BJ Fogg called this anchor moment. So it's the idea that it's something that is consistent in your day. And we'll talk about examples of that in a minute. So we think about what are the anchor moments we already have, things we're already doing consistently. And of course, as I said before, we think about what's the behavior we want. Right? I always say there's no room for shoulda, coulda, wouldas in tiny habits, no guilt, like focus on what you want to do right now. So we start with the behaviors that we want to have in our life. And the other key word here is build. And because we're starting with tiny, so we're going to build it up, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then finally, we have a celebration. So there's an ABC of tiny habits. So anchor moment, the behavior you want to build, and the celebration that you use to wire it in. This is probably the trickiest part for people. And again, I'm going to go through this in more detail. The high level version right now is that we use celebration. So we attach a positive emotion to the new behavior, because research has shown that if we can attach a positive behavior, an emotion, like a happy emotion, when we do something new, it makes our brain pay attention. And because our brain is paying attention, it makes it easier to remember to do it again the next day and the next day. And then that's what creates the new neural pathway in your brain to do that behavior. So, those of you who are like glass half full, pretty good at like seeing the positive, celebrate, gratitude every day, you may have an easier time with this than those of us who are maybe more cynical and maybe more questioning and maybe critical. And I'll give you the spiel on that in a minute. So let's go through each part. All right, anchor moments. So as I said, anchor moments are things that you already do every day. So these are already habits that you have. And the definition of a habit, by the way, is something that you do automatically. We don't think about getting out of bed and getting dressed or brushing your teeth, or maybe in the before time about how you got to the office, right? You probably didn't think about every step of how you commuted to the office every day, if that was part of your world, right? We just kind of, and that's why people miss their subway stop or they kind of get lost in their own head because they're not thinking about it, right? Or when you drive somewhere and someone's like, oh, how did you get here? You're like, oh, I don't know. I wasn't even really thinking about it. I kind of went on autopilot. That's because that's a habit. And the brain does this because the brain is lazy and it's looking always for new information. And so if it's routines, it's like, I don't need to pay attention to that because I know how to do that. I do it every day. So I'm just going to do it automatically. But if it's a new thing, I'm going to focus on that. So we look for those automatic moments in our day. And we try to think as precisely as possible. What is the specific action that we can think of that's going to prompt our brain to do the new behavior, the habit we're trying to build? Ideally, it's in the same location as our new habit and happens at the same frequency or time as our new habit. And so an example, oops, why didn't that go? An example of that, oh, I've lost my build. Okay, never mind. I'll give you a tiny habit. So after I brush my teeth, that's the anchor moment, I will floss one tooth. So the anchor moment is brush my teeth because I brush my teeth every night without thinking about it, right? And so that's an opportunity to think about how can I then build in that new behavior. Thank you it was on the last slide and I didn't talk to it. I skipped over it because I have all of you covering that section of my slide. So I apologize for skipping over the example that was on the previous slide. We'll keep going. So after I brush my teeth, I will floss one tooth and then do a fist pump, say yay me, do whatever celebration I want to do, okay? So the anchor moment is related to the new behavior I'm trying to build. It happens in the same place, right? My toothbrush is there, I'm in the bathroom, I'm in front of the sink, the floss is right there. I have set myself up for success, right? So it's in the same location, same frequency, and it's precise. After I brush my teeth, I'm going to pick up that floss. And the tiny bit, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, is that I'm just going to start with one tooth. And by the way, this was the very first habit that BJ Fogg looked at because he was trying to figure out how to create a flossing routine for himself. And he's like, okay, I'm a scientist, I got to try it on myself. So he tried to figure out how can I create a flossing habit. And this was the story I first heard and about BJ Fogg and tiny habits. And I now floss, and I never flossed before in my life. In fact, I grew up in a household where my mom disagreed with flossing. She was like, oh, it wrecks your gums, so don't floss. So we never flossed, like my entire childhood, most of my adult life. I've only been flossing for about 3 years. And my dentist is very happy with me now. But there are some nights where I only floss one tooth, right? And so we'll come on to what that looks like in terms of building. But it starts with finding that right anchor moment, that same location, same frequency, and is precise. So what I want you to do now is to think about from the moment you open your eyes until you start your work day, just that time of your day. In the chat, see if you can come up with 10 or as many as you can. Just write one and then hit enter. Morning anchor moments from the moment you open your eyes until you start your workday. Let's see what we can come up with. Coffee is a big one. Yeah, putting the kettlebell in the doorway, nice. Workout, good. Some of you have got exercise routines. Vitamins, taking vitamins, making tea. I mean, everyone gets out of bed, right? Like, be precise, right? Your feet touch the floor, you get out of bed, drink a glass of water. What else do you typically do in your morning routine? Shower. Probably get dressed, right? Most of us, at least top half.
Most of us.
Stretch, walk the dog. maybe you eat something, right? So yeah, nice, Robin, thank you. You get washed, brushed, get dressed, get your daughter up, get your daughter to daycare, make some coffee, have breakfast, and then start your work. So if you can start to think about your life in terms of a system or a process, then you can start to design for success. And so it starts by looking at what are my existing routines? And because those are those opportunities for us to build in new behaviors, new habits around, staying healthy, getting more sleep, trying to organize our work day. It starts by assessing, well, how do I normally spend my time? What do I normally do when I wake up, right? What does that routine look like? And where are there opportunities to add something else in? Great. So if you've got a journaling routine, that's fantastic. Those are great opportunities, whether you're drinking or, whatever you're drinking. Usually we all drink something in the morning, whether it's water or coffee or tea or whatever. So I love those ones for attaching habits to, because they are reliable. They happen no matter where we are, right? So in the old days, I used to travel a lot, and my routines would get messed up when I traveled, because I was in a hotel, I was in a new work location, all that stuff. And yet I still got out of bed every morning, no matter where I was. I still brushed my teeth and my hair and got dressed. I still had some kind of breakfast and drank coffee. So I still had those anchor moments, regardless of where I was. And so there are certain habits or behaviors I could still do, even though I wasn't at home, even though everything else had changed. So those are the ones that we want to start with. Once we identify those, then we go to this idea of, okay, well, what do I want to do with that? Now I've got this opportunity. After I shower, what should I put in there? After I press start on the coffee machine, what do I want to do with that moment while I'm waiting for the coffee to pour? Instead of just standing there looking at my phone, maybe there's an opportunity to check in with myself, to take a moment to do a yoga pose, to, I don't know, think about my day, pick a priority for my day, right? So, and it's totally not too much information, Janice. There's all kinds of habits around peeing. I'll share one in a minute. So we think about the behavior that we want to build, and we're going to go tiny. So, because build is the key word. And so tiny is really tiny. So floss one tooth, right? 30 seconds or less is if you're really, want specific. So we start tiny. That doesn't mean we stop at tiny. Tiny is the hack, right? So we start with tiny by saying, I'm just going to floss one tooth, because that reduces the need for motivation. That makes it easy. Because if you're like, oh, I'm exhausted, I binge watched Netflix, and it's super late and I have an early morning, I don't want to sit there and floss my teeth. Who flosses their teeth? I hate flossing my teeth. One tooth, right? Well, you just do one tooth. Okay, fine, I'll just do one tooth. So you do the one tooth. Well, what happens then? You probably keep going, right? Because you got the floss, you're doing it. You might as well just complete. So, some morning or some evenings rather, I do my whole mouth. Most times I do my whole mouth, but there are absolutely days where I just do the back teeth that my dentist always tells me to pay attention to, or I literally do one tooth. So another key principle that is really great for overachievers to hear is that we're going for consistency, not perfection. So if you were to floss one tooth, or that, those back teeth that your dentist, for me, always tells me to pay attention to, if I only did those teeth for the rest of my life, that's better than never flossing, right? If I only walk around the block instead of walking for an hour and a half, if I can walk around the block every single day, that's better than not moving at all. So we really have to, it's kind of that judgment piece that came up earlier. We have to give ourselves permission to go tiny, but it builds. So we can go past it for sure. So we pick the starter step. What is the starter step that we can always do? And we can always go past it. We can always do more than that starter step. But if on days we're exhausted, we're feeling crappy, we just don't feel like doing that habit, we still do the starter step And then we get to celebrate because we're basically creating a placeholder for the routine, for the habit that we want to build. And that allows us to feel like we're still above that action line. We're still the type of person that takes care of ourselves. We're still the type of person that can be healthy or can be organized because we've done the tiny version of that ultimate behavior. So consistency beats perfection every time. Okay, take a minute now. You've kind of already done it, but think about, so some of you said stay healthy, some of you said stay organized, or eating habits or around sleep. Try to be a little bit more specific now. You don't have to share if you don't want in the chat, but think about a habit you would like to build. Try to be more specific. And then we'll get into some examples. Before that, we have to celebrate. So take a minute. One touch on my mail. Nice, Janice, rather. File or toss. Yeah. As I said, I work with a lot of leaders who have habits around prioritizing their day and their to-do list. So we'll come on to that as well. And, exercise and health ones are great. So thinking about what is that habit? Do you want to do push-ups every day? Do you want to walk every day? Do you want to do a yoga, whether it's, a couple of poses, a couple of stretches every day? What would help you feel better about yourself right now? That's the area that I want you to think about. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Before we get there though, one last piece of the puzzle, which is the celebration. So I told you this is the one that people sometimes struggle with. So here's a couple of key thoughts around this. First of all, emotions build habits, and that's good emotions or bad emotions. So those bad habits that you have, remember I said they're there for a reason. My almost entire life, well, that's not true. From the time I was a teenager until about 2 years ago, I used to pick my nails, not bite them, but I would pick them and that made it harder to stop actually, because if I was biting my nails, I could have just put that stuff that tastes awful on your nails, and that would have probably stopped me. But because I was picking them, it made it harder. So I really made it hard for myself. And so I learned about tiny habits. I was doing tiny habits, and I'm like, okay, it's time to figure out how to stop doing this. And it was about, well, why am I doing this? I had to ask myself why, and when am I doing this? And so you get a little bit like a scientist, think like a scientist, right? Well, why is this happening? When is it happening? Start noticing when it's happening. And it was usually when I was nervous about something. It filled a need, right? I was nervous, and so it was like a nervous tick. Well, then we get into, so how do you change it, right? And so that's where you come up with the replacement ideas. I have beautiful nails now, haven't picked them in 2 years. So that was a big habit for me to break, but it started with understanding what was the emotion. So emotions build habits. Knowing that and designing for success means that we want to look for positive emotions that can help us be resourceful. And again, there's lots of science coming up. Yeah, Roy, I see. Let me just finish this one thought. There's lots of science coming up around the idea that positive emotions create new neural pathways and can create new neural pathways to allow us to change. And so that's what we're tapping into. Roy, go ahead.
When you were biting your nails, did you have the end goal to have nice nails one day? Is that why you were so concerned about your nails? Or did you just wanted to stop biting your nails because you thought it was a bad habit? Did you have the end goal of one day I'm going to have really beautiful nails and I'm going to get them painted nice and all that kind of stuff? Did you have that?
For sure. Yep. Yeah. Well, it's probably both, right? I knew it was a bad habit, but also I was embarrassed about my hands, right? I would go to the dentist and I would kind of cover up my hands because I didn't want them looking at my hands that were all, not looking nice. So it was definitely tied up to my identity, which is a great point to bring up. Thank you for tying that in, because behaviors and what we want to do is absolutely tied up in who we are as who we see ourselves, who we want to be. And so by looking at, and I think I said it before, I'm the type of person that takes care of myself, is organized, is a successful entrepreneur. Those statements about yourself are a great place to start in terms of what are the habits you want to build right now. And again, starting from that positive point rather than the like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this or whatever. So we want the tiny habits approach has a lot of the sort of positive psychology behind it. So this idea that we're building on our strengths. And that's why we use celebration when we're building the new habit. So when we're just starting with a new tiny habit, we want to celebrate after we do that new behavior, because that sends the signal to our brain that that was a good thing. And actually the scientific explanation, not a neuroscientist, but this is what I've been told, is that it basically creates a reward prediction error in your brain. Your brain is not expecting you to go woohoo after doing one push-up or flossing one tooth. And so your brain pays attention. It goes, wait, what just happened? Why are we celebrating that like really simple thing that we just did? Normally we celebrate after we've done something really hard. And here you're celebrating after this easy thing. Why? And so it pays attention. So it wires it in quickly. Vanya, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious about the celebration part. So you're saying that whatever the behavior that we perceive as maybe difficult, but isn't, to reward it, it can literally be as simple as just clapping and saying hooray.
Yeah, the interesting thing is because now they have these fMRIs, right? So they can measure the frequencies in your brain. We have a much greater understanding of how the brain works. And what they have found is just smiling.
Right.
When you smile, it sends that positive emotion signal to your brain, which releases dopamine. And just that, even if you're grinning and not really meaning it, it still sends the signal. And so you're all of a sudden, you feel better. Your brain's like, oh, great, we're happy. Yay. I'll release all those hormones that mean I'm good.
Right.
I'm not under threat.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So we celebrate. Now, any celebration can do. Doesn't matter what you do. Some people like physical gestures. So they do like a fist pump, or they pat themselves on the back, or they put their hand on their heart. Some people do something, an internal, a mental one. They'll say, yay me, inside their head. Or I have one where I say, well, that was easy. And it kind of responds to my like critical brain and makes me laugh. Sometimes I smile and just do the smile. It doesn't matter what you do. But we do want you to try and celebrate after you do your new habit. That is what's going to wire it in quickly. So this research, or there's the 30 days or the however many times you have to do something for a habit to sink in. That's actually not what BJ Fogg's research has shown. His research has shown that if you celebrate, you attach a positive emotion to a new behavior, that it can take as little as a few days for something to become ingrained, to become automatic. And I have experienced that. Sometimes when I'm coaching people and they share their habits with me, and I'm like, oh, that's a good habit. I'm not even intending to take on that habit, and I'll start doing it. And so I'm pretty good at taking on new habits now because I've been focused on this for a few years. That doesn't mean that they stay with me forever, but they'll come and go. But the ones that I want, like I recently added a new habit in to do every time after my foot touches the first stair, I do like lifts with my heels because I've got an Achilles tendonitis happening. So I do little lifts up and down on the bottom stair of my house. That one became pretty much automatic I would say, in the space of a few days. I do it every time I go up the stairs now. And in fact, my whole family laughs at me because they're like, oh, she's doing her heel thing again. And like my daughter, my youngest, does it with me now because she's seen me do it so many times. And so we go up and down on the stairs. So you have fun with it and you figure out what works. Now, here's a little test. Imagine you've got a piece of paper that you crumple up and you're going to throw it into the recycling bin and it lands perfectly, 3-pointer. What's your reaction? What do you do? Near universal, apparently, is hands in the air, right? If you've ever seen sports teams or athletes are really good at celebration. And in fact, scientists believe that they have tapped into this and they've figured out how to tell their brain, yeah, that was the right sequence of events, do that again. And that's why you see, that's not why, but they do it naturally. But you'll see them always celebrating with their team. Babies, you ever seen a toddler take their first step or walk across the room for the first time? What does every adult that's around them do? We cheer them on, right? Woohoo! Imagine a 5-year-old, fully able, no, physical disabilities, walking across the room. We wouldn't cheer them on then, right? We cheer and we celebrate in the beginning when we're wiring the habit in. Once it becomes mostly automatic, then it's less important to celebrate. All right, let's get into some recipes, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. So as I said, I have these 3 areas that I developed last year at the beginning of the pandemic. They're all important all the time, but they felt more important, especially for leaders, last March when I developed them. And so I have habits around staying organized, staying connected, and staying positive. The interesting thing is, it doesn't matter where you start with these, they're kind of all interconnected. So some of us might feel like we're pretty organized, but we're having a hard time staying positive. So we focus on staying positive, but that's going to help us continue to, be connected and stay organized. So they do interrelate. So it doesn't really matter where you start. So you start where you want to start. I'm going to share some examples, and then I'll get you to think about your habits. So just a couple of quick things about habits. When you start with this, you test it out. I think I've said this, you start with the easy ones, and it is really important to go back to that anchor moment. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? Like, what's the habit I want, and how am I going to make it tiny? And then where do I put it in my day? So focusing on that, the anchor moment's really your foundation, just like in yoga or any other thing like that. You really want to have a great foundation, a strong foundation. BJ Fogg has a nice expression: if you plant the seed in the right spot, it will grow all by itself. So finding the right anchor moment makes that tiny habit also take very quickly, because you found the right point in your day where to add in the new behavior. So here's some examples. This is my favorite tiny habit that I've ever come up with. And it's a great one for staying positive. After I look in the mirror, I will smile. I mean, I look in the mirror actually several times a day because there's a mirror in my bathroom, right? So every time I go into the bathroom, I'm washing my hands, I look in the mirror and I smile. And what I love about this tiny habit is that the celebration is built right in. And so it's not like I have to remember to celebrate doing my tiny habit. I just do it because I've already done it. Roy, go ahead.
Is there a reason why you're smiling?
Yeah, because that smiling apparently sends the signal to your brain. It triggers dopamine, which makes you feel better.
Okay, so it's just about feeling good every day when you smile with yourself. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. The next one, after my feet touch the floor in the morning, I didn't have space on the slide, I will say today is going to be a great day. So very specific anchor moment. My feet touch the floor, right? That happens every day. And then I just say to myself, today's going to be a great day. And then I can do a fist pump, or I can smile, or I can put my hand on my heart, whatever celebration I want. And then the one for the evening, after my head hits the pillow at night, I'll think of one thing I'm grateful for. Now, these 2 habits, these bookends to your day, have actually changed my personality. I am a way more positive person than I ever was before. And they have certainly helped me. Actually, all 3 of these have helped me through COVID. So when I'm having a tough time, like every night, my head hits the pillow, I think of at least one thing I'm grateful for. Now, these don't grow, right? So some tiny habits stay tiny. Some others that we'll get into do grow into that ultimate behavior that you want, and we have to use a starter step for them. Yes, Roy.
Well, in regards to the being grateful before you go to bed, that did grow for me, because it went from going to bed and saying today was a great day, maybe something happened, to the point where every single night I'm writing down 3 things in a tiny little book that's by my bed.
Yeah.
So it kind of did grow in a way where now I come up with 3 things that I'm grateful every single day.
Yeah.
And I haven't stopped
fantastic.
that for about 10 years. So it's kind of nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. And that's a great one.
It does grow.
Yeah, and we often work with people to help them build that habit. And it starts by, putting the journal by your bed. And then it might just be, I open the journal. And if I write something down, yay me, extra celebration. And if all I do is open the journal and look at the last time I wrote, I still get to celebrate, right? That's the building. Here's some organizing ones. So if you don't already have a to-do list habit, here's how you'd start it. After I sit down at my desk in the morning, I will look at my to-do list or open the app or open my calendar. If I go on to then, look at my list, my priorities, maybe I number them, maybe I pick the first thing. Those are all bonus points. Starts by opening the app, opening up where you have your, where you keep track of your activities, or looking. In my case, I like to write things down so I can scratch them off. So I still have an old school list that I keep on my desk. And then I would celebrate. I've left off the celebrations here. After I finish my lunch, this anchor moment would need to be much more precise. But in the, just because I didn't have space, I left it off. I'll touch one thing on my desk. So Janice, this was kind of yours, right? Like you start by just touching one thing and then you deal with it, right? Whether it's sorting it, filing it, putting it in the garbage or the recycling, but the first tiny starter step is just to touch it. And if that's all I do, yay me, because I'm busy or I'm late for a meeting. And if tomorrow I touch it and I deal with it, bonus points. So consistency, not perfection. And then after I end a call, I'll capture one action or next step. Again, I could go on to share it with someone. I could go on to actually do the action, but it starts by just capturing.
What do you mean by capture in action?
It could be recording it, like writing it
Oh, I
down
see,
or
okay.
putting it in my calendar or wherever I keep track of my actions.
Hey,
And then
Kate,
yep.
Can I ask you a quick question? You and Janice have both mentioned something, and I'm not sure what it means. What do you mean by you touch something?
Like literally touch it.
Yeah, but for what?
To organize, to sort it. So to tidy it, to deal with it, right? So that I don't have clutter all around my desk, right? An organized space, organized mind, all that stuff. That helps us to feel more in control. Yeah. I am going to share these with you, by the way, at the end of the session. I know we're running up on the hour, so I'm just going to go through these quickly. So tiny habits for staying connected. So this could mean a bunch of things. It could mean connecting with people. So after I open my email, I'll think of one client to contact. I do this one, I write their name down. If I go ahead and open the email or put their phone number in or start to send them a text, bonus points, but it starts with me capturing their name on my to-do list. So that could be one. It might also be connecting with myself. How am I feeling? So after I open my calendar, I relax my shoulders, take a deep breath. It's okay, I got this. And it might also be connecting just in terms of how people are feeling. After I say hello or at the start of a meeting, I'll ask others, a specific question about how are you coping? How are you feeling with, the current lockdown? Something to connect with others around me. All right. So at the end, I'm going to send you a handout because I know we're kind of out of time here. So you can create your habits. You might use the ones I've shared. So the recipe goes after I, and that's your anchor moment. I will, and then you've got your tiny starter step. And then you're going to celebrate whatever that celebration is. And then remember, it's just for the beginning, just so you wire it in. You say, yay me. So really quickly, we change best when we feel successful. Tiny truly can build to big results. And there's no room for guilt. Just experiment. See what happens. Keep it fun and keep building on the success. So there's lots of different ways that we can continue. So I have, there's a program that, just stop sharing this, that BJ Fogg runs online. So you can learn more about tiny habits. With a free 5-day program that I can coach you on. I've put the link in the chat to sign up with me if you want to learn more around how to do that 5-day program or work with me. And if you fill in that form, that way I'll have your email address. I will send you the handout that has some of those examples and the process that we went through today.
Awesome. You will send us that via email, I assume.
Yes, if you fill in that form, that way I've got your email address. I can send
the form you just sent it to the chat?
Okay. Correct. Yeah.
Kate, thank you. I appreciate that we're sort of running out of time, but one of the things we like to do in Keller Williams is share our ahas.
It's a hard one to say.
I would love to hear from, a handful of you, just, a little tiny thing that maybe you learned today that you can take into the rest of your day and the rest of your world.
Well, for me personally, it was when you said that the emotions are linked to habits. And, it kind of just got me thinking of where my bad habits are coming from and how you can kind of apply change to that. Because if you know what's causing a habit, it's easy to correct it. So that was it for me.
Great, thanks, Vinya.
Anyone else?
And yeah, the reminder of, sorry, I cut somebody off. Who was going to speak?
It's all right, go ahead.
Oh, just the reminder to celebrate. Because when I used to, if I did something that was out of my comfort zone or just something that I was trying to build a habit on, I used to say, I freaking rock. Like I used to look in the mirror and say it. And I have got none of that, but it makes you laugh. It just makes it such a positive association. So that was a good reminder.
I was going to say, I just like the idea of identifying an anchor moment to trigger the next step. Just that one little simple thing to kind of create a pattern of success.
Yeah, and really, you can kind of avoid the celebration to a certain degree if you're not sure about the celebration part. If you find that great anchor moment, you'll get pretty far, on building that new habit just by having the right anchor moment.
This is
Did you-
Karen. Oops, sorry. I like the book about, when your feet hit the ground and being positive, and then at the end of the day, just going to bed and thinking about what you're grateful for.
Great, thanks, Carolyn.
For me, thank you. Thank you. For me, it's it doesn't matter how easy you make something for someone. If they're not motivated, they're not going to do it. I think children are a good example of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I share a really quick story, like 2 seconds? I used to coach my kids' soccer team at a rep level, and they were horrible. Like I don't think they won a game in a year. And we were at the last tournament of the year, and they were just down on themselves the whole time. And we just went into the last game, and I had a quick chat with them, and I said, you're down on yourselves. I said, next time you string together 3 passes, just have that little celebration. They're like, what do you mean? And I used the example of, have you ever made a grilled cheese sandwich and flipped it perfectly? And everybody identified with that particular perfect flipping of a grilled cheese sandwich is like from the age of 8 on, you make them yourself. And that shimmy you get in the kitchen of enjoying that perfect melted cheese. And they all just took off and they ended up winning their last game. It was kind of cool, but just identifying that little moment with something that everybody's familiar with and using happiness to kind of create that joy. It was cool.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, especially right now, right? I mean, people are struggling. It's been a really hard year. And so that's why I feel so passionately about, really bringing this message that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to go for the big, huge goals right now. You can shrink it down. One of my clients, she said the thing that got her through, we were talking about last year, was making her bed every day. And just, she got up and she made her bed every day through the hard part of the first wave. And that helped her to keep going. I was like, that's an amazing story, right? That's, just having that one thing that you're doing that can keep you going.
Yeah, it's those little things. Well, if anybody else has any questions or you think of anything afterwards, just you can either connect with Kate here directly through this form or just get in touch with me and I'll put the two of you together. Thank you all for being here and have a wonderful afternoon.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Kate.
Okay, thank you.